Hi, I'm Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research. Welcome to a review of our Learning How to Learn series, a collection of discussions with qualified individuals on accessing reliable information on the topics that matter to us the most. My guest today is Erica Lutz. Erica is an experienced podcaster and longtime popular video show host. She is the executive director of Expanding Frontiers Research, where she conducts engaging interviews with journalists, researchers, and experts on a variety of social and technical issues, including cults, cybersecurity, the environment, and the intersection of the intelligence and UFO communities. Erica studied music and voice at the University of Utah, is a talented singer and artist, and a longtime successful Salt Lake City business owner in the health and wellness industry. Hi, Erica. Thank you for joining.
Absolutely. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Jack. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to speak with you. I thought that we would review some clips from some of the guests of the Learning How to Learn series, and I'll get your thoughts on it, and we'll talk about the things that they discuss and the insights that they brought up. How's that sound?
That sounds wonderful. I've enjoyed watching the series, and now I can't wait to comment on each individual guest and the really helpful insight that they have put forward to our listeners.
Good, good. Thank you. Well, for starters, I have a couple of clips I'll play that address some of the initial things we might consider when we encounter articles, videos, or other material we see as potentially significant. Here's what science journalist and nonfiction author Sarah Scholes had to say about that.
I think the first question I ask when I encounter a new piece of information is just to assess my own mental framework. Like, does this confirm something that I already think? Or does it kind of contradict what I already think? And in both cases, I think that tells you something about how you should treat the material. Like, if it's confirming, you should be just as skeptical of it, I think, as if it's disconfirming. And so just, being aware of your own mental framework first, I think.
That's an issue that came up repeatedly with the guests. What do you think about that, Erica?
I think it's really important. I think now more than ever, we live in a society where we are literally getting fed information that confirms what we want to be the truth. And as a result, that's a great point that she makes. We don't have the, we maybe don't have all the facts because we're just being told what we want to hear. And that is a very critical issue to think about when you are trying to learn and you're trying to vet good information and make decisions from information, whether you like it or not. You're just trying to find the truth between the two spheres.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And another of our guests was Vanessa Valilco. She's a talented podcaster and she has a, a bachelor's degree in science and sociology. And she continued that same thought pattern with this statement.
That idea of the emotional attachment to something, that if we want to believe something, if something reinforces something that we have heard elsewhere or we've heard from somebody that we respect, because that is one of those devastating things where, and this has happened to me too, where there's a writer or a researcher that I really like, and then I read their next book or their next article, and there are, or it's a subject matter I really like, and I suddenly see there are glaring errors.
Another great founded comment from Vanessa, who I just have to say I adore Vanessa. Vanessa's a really wonderful addition to what we do here at EFR, and I always appreciate her insight on things. I mean, it is true. We tend to place and I'd like to say, especially in the UFO world, but in any real life situation, there are authorities, whether they are truly authorities or whether they just claim to be authorities. People look up to these figures and expect that everything they say will be correct, and therefore people aren't really doing their due diligence to make sure the information that they're putting forward is based in fact. And that can be extremely dangerous, especially now when you've got, things like QAnon or, cult leaders that are out there promoting disinformation and misinformation. Just because somebody looks good on a YouTube video, that doesn't mean that they're a qualified subject matter expert, and that doesn't mean that they have the best intention to give you good information.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like in the fringe and the UFO topics, we have a lot of former intelligence community members and people that have been contracted by intelligence agencies like their entire careers, that it's the same people over and over again, as others have aptly pointed out, that keep these narratives running. And it requires turning over a fresh audience to not know that we've just been here repeatedly. And we'll get into that as we go. But yeah,
And
that
this,
what Vanessa said is just, I mean, echoing your observations about what Sarah said. Yeah.
right. Well, we all know what's going on, and it's fun to hear it from in different, different ways. And yeah, this is really fun, and this is important for our audience, and this is something that we strive with at EFR. We really truly believe that, well, we know that you have to have factual information. We know that, these days it is very difficult to find that. And I fully expect with our current regime, that that will be even more difficult to find, with books disappearing off of bookshelves, with things disappearing off internet archives. The truth is going to be something that you're going to have to really search for diligently and understand, how to find good information. So I'm really proud that Jack, I'm really excited that you've done this series for our audience.
Thank you. Another of our guests is Aaron Gullius. He is a historian and the host of the popular The Saucer Life podcast. And he continued on this topic as well, of the importance of identifying why we may be drawn to a particular article or video or something like that in the first place. Here's what Aaron had to say.
I think one of the first things to do before even thinking about sources and factualness or anything is to think about how that video, that story, that meme, or whatever it is made you feel. Because that's one of the things that social media algorithms really feed on, is generating some kind of emotional response, because an emotional response is going to prompt engagement, and the more engagement there is, the more money is made. So a lot of this content, even when it's shared, with the best of intentions by our friends and neighbors and colleagues, it's still part of this ecosystem of trying to get a reaction.
Absolutely. Those are great points again by Aaron. I think that it is interesting to see how much, just, even with Facebook and social media and movies that we consume, all of these things, like Aaron is mentioning, need to hook into our emotions to make it sellable, to make it effective, to make it to entrap you, to push you into a group of people who's going to light a pitchfork and go out in the town square. I mean, and so that emotion is a key part of driving things. It's also the way we market in businesses, to tap into emotion. And so people do need to be cognizant of what they're seeing and how they're feeling, and understand that there might be, as good as this makes you feel, there might be a motivation behind that good feeling that might not be that good for you.
Absolutely. How does it hook us? Why does it hook us? What's the motive of the person carrying this message? Is it just that they're passionate about their message, or do they have an ulterior motive and hidden agenda? These are important things to ask, and it certainly ties back into that emotional component of, if it supports my belief systems, maybe I'm a little less concerned about fact checking it than if it doesn't. So am I wanting to like retweet this or repost it or whatever to argue with it? Or am I supporting it? And not only why are they interested in it, but why is it hooking me? How's it grabbing me? Absolutely.
Right, absolutely. And you see that a lot also in political campaign uh, advertising and things. I mean, it's just that's the way it's used. That's marketing. That's hooking people. You know, they have movie studios that people will go to test the emotion that you know, if this how this movie is playing with people's emotions and how scared it gets them. And that's the way of the world. And that's one of the reasons why data mining is so big for a lot of these companies. You know, it's so they can hook into your emotional need.
Yes, yes. Now, Heidi Beadle, another guest on Learning How to Learn, is a Colorado journalist who covers policy and a number of significant social issues. Heidi emphasized it's a hall of mirrors out there with disinformation and misinformation and people that are just wrong about things they're saying. Heidi also addressed the importance of figuring out where stories and narratives come from.
Really kind of tracing these things back to their origin, looking at who's kind of spreading these ideas and where, you know, where they might have come from in the information ecosystem is kind of an important aspect of really determining whether it's credible or not, you know.
And now that ties into the same group of people in the UFO community that have been raking these stories around, plowing them, turning them over, repurposing them, and putting them back out for years, among any number of other examples we could think of.
Right. And you did mention earlier, you know, the fact that they just wait for younger generations to come along that don't know the truth about their stories and things. You know, MJ12, well, that was disproved, you know, a decade ago, over a decade ago. And, you know, now here we've got a whole new group of believers of MJ12, and the same group of people is still putting it out there because they know another gullible group of people will come along. But that really, that is something.
Yeah, it is. And echoing Heidi's point of identifying original source material, that of course runs through all of the guests so far. And here's what Vanessa added about
That emotional response, especially when you believe something or you believe in something, you want to find evidence that supports that belief to the point that you are ignoring reality sometimes, which is the, again, is this, did your favorite author say this beautiful thing, or did somebody else, or did somebody summarize or incorrectly summarize something they said and came up with a nice turn of phrase? Again, to me, that matters. Attribution matters because with science, right? The whole point of describing your methodology when you're doing a scientific experiment is that it is then repeatable, because that is how something goes from a hypothesis to a working theory. It is preponderance of evidence. It is repeatable studies over and over. Similarly, with literature, if you're saying, or even with like government documents and certain more esoteric subjects, right? Okay, this person said this at this date and time, here's the report. I want to be able to go and find that report and see, oh, am I coming to the same conclusion based on what the text says, not what somebody's wishful thinking about what the text says. So again, if, you know, as primary sources, the original sources are so important for research, because unfortunately, people can say anything about anything, and unless you're following up to look for it, again, they could be inventing things out of whole cloth.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and we, again, in the UFO world is such a great way to describe some of these things. I mean, you have one person saying that this person said something, and, when you go back to the source, it oftentimes is very different from what people are telling when they're reinventing what the original source said.
Yeah, and not only will self-described researchers cite a source, you run down the source and read the text, and it's like, well, that's a really creative interpretation of that text there. We've seen circumstances where they'll tell us about this be all end all video that's coming. Just wait till you see this one. Wait till you see this one. It's military. It's this. It's that. And it's grainy, fuzzy dot on the horizon like every other. But I mean, we have seen this again and again and again. Absolutely.
Yep. Never fails to amaze me.
Now, in addition to politics and policy issues, Heidi also worked on tracking down the facts of stories like the alleged alien Nazca mummies. She observed how the same disinformation techniques employed in fringe communities like the UFO culture are used in increasingly more consequential situations. Here's what Heidi said.
One thing that I think is important to note, like, talking about conspiracies are fun because they're outrageous, right? And you can really, it's like, the difference between like a 100-piece puzzle and a 1,000-piece puzzle, right? And like these UFO conspiracies and stuff like that, that's like the 100-piece puzzle. But the same sort of information ways people use information and use rhetoric and use studies, that's also like that happens in public policy, right? One of the episodes we recently did on the Fever Swamp Review podcast was about the network of think tanks, right? Things like the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute or, the Manhattan Institute, or here in Colorado, we've got the Independent, like all these things that are institutes or like, policy kind of networks, the State Policy Network, which funds tons of think tanks, right? That information network kind of operates in a similar vein, right? Because these things are kind of industry related or, partisan kind of aligned sort of organizations that are they're producing papers, they're producing research, they're producing documentaries that are being used in like federal policy kind of discussions right now.
Your thoughts, Erica?
I mean, I think that's really interesting. And the Nazca mummies is, that whole story is so interesting to watch. But I love the way that she's, talking about think tanks and the way that they operate and promote specific information and put that out there. And a lot of those think tanks are very, you don't know people, most people don't know about them, but they shape a lot of public opinion and really steer politics and world views on things. So definitely, it's always good to understand what goes on behind the scenes with regards to that.
Yeah, we have a concerning number of former military personnel, intelligence community personnel, active and former political leaders that get on these conspiracy trains and uh, fuel the fires about UFO cover-ups, UAP cover-ups, whatever the buzzwords may be for their era. And Heidi makes a really interesting observation about how the techniques and the methods of propaganda and shaping policy are kind of the same from one culture and one specific genre to another. James Carrion comes to mind, that he was one of the first that I was watching about some of the modern internet circumstances. Like we had these message boards and UFO forums in the 1990s and the 2000s, and Carrion had observed that they could even prove as somewhat of a laboratory for UFO memes. And it was just kind of one could see it as a continuation of the Richard Doty type of passing forged documents around, that we had so many intelligence members active on these UFO forums and, above top secret, open mind, places like that. And Heidi is in a position to have direct experience with that covers Colorado issues, policy issues, political races, and aspects of the fringe UFO culture, and is just observing those similarities there.
It's something when you start to really understand what's going on behind the scenes, it really opens your eyes, and it makes a lot of sense. Things become they make sense when you listen to people like Heidi explain, or talking about the message boards and talking about the ways that this information can be inserted here. And oftentimes we think there's a certain purpose, but we're so completely off base because we don't understand this could be coming from a collective group of people with a very specific agenda, and it's probably not to disclose UFO. And, UFOs are here.
Yes, and the antidote to all of that is critical thinking and fact checking and research best practices. Prove me wrong. Prove something EFR has put forth. Prove it wrong. Prove this person wrong. As Vanessa pointed out during her discussion, seek to disprove. You'll never really prove anything, just seek to disprove. And I learned from Sarah Stolz, to seek to refute or to verify, and that's the antidote. Absolutely.
Right. And I just have to say here with that, too, we know that there are a lot of quote unquote intelligence professionals, people who have been in the military or held jobs in law enforcement that seem to intersect quite frequently in conspiracy fields or UFO fields. And I think that it's just because, again, like we were talking about a few minutes ago, just because somebody has a title, that does not necessarily make them a credible source. And always seek to find and verify if they truly do have the credentials that they're claiming. So a lot of work
Absolutely.
needs to be done, but critical thinking is a must, as we both say and understand.
Absolutely. Heidi had pointed out there's nothing new under the sun, along with our discussion of repurposing the same old memes, the same old narratives, just presenting them a different way, or sometimes not even such a different way, and just using them again for people that hadn't heard of them before. And here's what Aaron Gullius added to that.
These ideas, these viewpoints, these policies, these are not new. These are not novel. And this is going to end up hurting people. And so we think the best we can do is sort of, try to present information and share information that is accurate and that can be a bulwark against nonsense, really, or especially mendacious nonsense.
Kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's really not anything new under the sun. There's always variations of how to spin it or how to use a technique. And as we've been discussing, the antidote to it is to fact check it, to find out the motives, how true is it, how good are the sources, run down the footnotes. If something can be taken down by scrutiny, then it should be taken down.
Absolutely. And I think too, and especially in the fringe topics, I mean, I think, I've started to do this where I don't take anything at face value. I don't think it is a factual thing until I do a thorough background check. And then I begin, it's like if you and this is a weird way of saying this, but like if I've learned over the years that people that I have given my respect to didn't deserve respect. And so I kind of I'm not going to respect a person until they earn it. And I'm not going to look at a story, especially in the UFO topic, and believe it until every fact is shown to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And people that are really passionate and really care do it that way. They want to know the truth. Like, so we might ask, so what do we do? What can be done about it? And about any issues, politics, local issues of significance, social issues. Here's what Sarah Skoll said about that.
For you and your viewers and listeners, like focusing on the things that you really care about and deciding to go deep on those, I think is a good way to start. Like what really matters to me, can I get to the bottom of it in these source-based ways?
Yes, we have to decide what's most important to us. We can't be hobby experts on everything. We can't track down every story, every video. We have to decide what's most important to us and then track that down. Would you agree, Erica?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Aaron points out, if we're willing to identify that source material, if we have an internet connection and a desire to understand the facts, we can indeed meaningfully study history.
Without the sources, all we have are historians writing sort of master narratives and telling us this is what happened. But especially with the internet and archives and things being digitized and online, FOIA requests, things like that, we can go in and find these things for ourselves. And we might not have the training or skill of all have the training or skill of professional historians, but that's the great thing about history. If you can read, you can learn about history. You don't need a lab. You don't need, fancy electron microscopes. You just need an internet connection or a library and the ability to read, and you can put things together. And if somebody goes into that process with a sort of sense of fairness and a desire to understand the facts, then they can get somewhere.
Absolutely. You got to study. Got to study. Yep, it's like going back to school. If you want to learn something, you have to put in your hard work and go to multiple places and check sources and find out the facts behind stories.
And have the desire. I think that's a good point too. We can't run down everything like we were discussing. We have to identify what's most important to us, what we're motivated to actually learn about. And so that's a key point as well. Now, one of the things Vanessa Valilko addressed was the importance of lay people learning to read scientific papers. She mentioned this in response to the question I gave all the guests about where I might want to go in future episodes and future things to consider. A listener was interested in Vanessa's interview and reached out and commented that there are scientific societies that will place lay people in contact with helpful experts. For example, the listener and viewer made me aware is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, and it has an expert matching service known as Cylon, SCI capital LINE. It can be reached at cylon.org, and I will put links in the show description. Another person I came across is Dr. Ellie Murphy. Dr. Murphy is on Blue Sky and writes a blog with a step-by-step guide for reading scientific research papers. Dr. Murphy even walks us through a specific paper on bird flu in cats. And again, I will put links in the show description, and Dr. Murphy can be found on Blue Sky. Now, do you have any comments or thoughts in closing, Erica?
Just in closing, I think that this is, again, I've loved watching all of the wonderful guests that you've brought on. They have a lot of knowledge in all of these areas, and they can teach us a great deal about how to find good information. I want to stress, as I did earlier in the show, that right now we're kind of on we're in a point in history where we aren't going to be able to access records as we would like to. We've heard news reports about entire FOIA sections disappearing for certain organizations. We've heard how here in Utah, the grandma is pretty much null and void now, and some interesting things have been happening there that Jack and I try to inform you about on our Blue Sky page. But we're also seeing that there is an attempt to rewrite history to train our young children in school that we are living in it where the only history that's important is a Christian history, and therefore books are disappearing from libraries, but information is disappearing off the internet. And so now more than ever, it is important to heed the words of wisdom from our guests and learn how to really get in there and find that good critical information that will really help your life and the life of your loved ones and friends.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining me today, Erica.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I just want to tell everybody, please make sure that you click and like, subscribe, share information about Expanding Frontiers Research. You can visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org, and you can also help pay some of the overhead that we have as a nonprofit doing records requests and doing writing reports and publishing them. So we appreciate your help. We love Expanding Frontiers Research, and we look forward to sharing more and teaching you more on how to keep yourself safe, how to learn, and how to move through disinformation, misinformation, and become a better, more productive person. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. And please find the full guest interviews in the Learning How to Learn series. You can find more useful links in the show description. And as Erica pointed out, visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org and support our work on Patreon, please. Thank you.